The wind on Veridian-5 cut through Dr. Amara Hassan's thermal suit like a blade forged from absolute zero. She pressed forward across the crystalline wasteland, her breath forming impossible geometric patterns in the alien atmosphere before being swept away by gusts that howled with the voice of eternity itself. Behind her, the rest of the research team followed in single file, their figures ghost-like against the perpetual twilight that shrouded this distant world. "Readings are getting stronger," called Dr. Chenwei, the team's xenoarchaeologist, his voice crackling through the comm system. "Whatever's down there, it's big. And old. Older than anything we've ever found." Dr. Hassan paused at the edge of what their orbital scans had identified as an anomaly, a perfect geometric depression in the planet's surface, as if someone had carved a precise mathematical equation into the very bedrock. The walls descended at impossible angles, creating optical illusions that made her eyes water when she tried to focus on the corners. "How old?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would challenge everything they understood about the universe. "Preliminary dating suggests." Wei's voice faltered. "Hassan, this can't be right. The isotope decay patterns indicate this structure is at least 4 billion years old. That predates Earth's formation by nearly 600 million years." Dr. Elena Vasquez, their exobiologist, knelt at the rim and scraped samples of the strange crystalline material. "The molecular structure is unlike anything in our databases. It's as if someone took organic compounds and metallic alloys and convinced them to occupy the same space simultaneously." The fourth member of their team, Dr. Marcus Holloway, their quantum physicist and resident skeptic, shook his head vigorously. "There has to be contamination in the readings. Precursor civilizations are one thing, but this would mean we're not the first," Hassan finished quietly. "That intelligence, technology, perhaps even humanity itself, has cycles we never imagined." The depression stretched before them like a wound in reality, its walls lined with formations that seemed to shift and writhe when observed peripherally. Hassan had led 17 deep space archaeological expeditions in her career, but nothing had prepared her for the sense of recognition that washed over her as she stared into the depths of this alien structure. "We're going down," she decided, her voice carrying the authority that had made her the youngest team leader in the Colonial Archaeological Division's history. Whatever built this, they wanted it to be found. The descent took 3 hours. Their equipment registered no atmosphere within the structure, yet their environmental sensors detected something that defied classification. Not quite energy, not quite matter, but something that existed in the spaces between quantum states. The walls grew more complex as they descended, covered in patterns that seemed to tell a story in a language that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to some deeper part of the mind. "Are you seeing this?" Vasquez whispered, her voice filled with wonder and unease. "The patterns, they're not random. They're almost like neural networks, but mechanical. Or maybe mechanical networks that think like brains." Holloway was taking readings on instruments that had never been designed for measurements like this. "Energy signatures are off the charts, but not in any spectrum we recognize. It's as if the entire structure exists partially outside normal space-time." At a depth of nearly a kilometer, they found the chamber. It was perfectly spherical, carved from a single piece of the same crystalline metallic composite that lined the shaft. In the center, suspended within a matrix of impossibly thin filaments that sparkled like starlight frozen in amber, was the being. Hassan's breath caught. The figure was humanoid, unmistakably so, but wrong in ways that made her genetic memory scream warnings. It stood roughly 2 meters tall, with proportions that were almost human, but somehow optimized, as if evolution had continued past the point where humanity had stopped. But it was the integration that made her blood run cold. Metallic components weren't attached to the being, they grew from it. Circuitry patterns flowed beneath translucent skin like a secondary circulatory system. Where one might expect bones, crystalline structures pulsed with their own internal light. The face was beautiful and terrible, human features preserved in materials that had never known organic life, yet somehow retained the essence of consciousness. "My God," Vasquez breathed. "It's not half human, half machine. It's something that was human and became machine, or machine that achieved humanity. The integration is complete at the cellular level." Wei was already setting up dating equipment. If the structure is 4 billion years old, this being is older than our entire solar system, Hassan completed. The question is, how is that possible when it's clearly based on human physiology? Holloway's instruments were registering impossible readings. The quantum signature, it's not static. There's active processing happening inside that matrix. This isn't a fossil or a corpse. It's in some kind of suspended state. As if responding to his words, the filaments around the being began to glow more brightly. Throughout the chamber, previously dormant systems awakened. Panels that had appeared decorative suddenly revealed themselves as interfaces, displaying symbols that shifted and changed as they watched. We need to document everything before we attempt any, Hassan began, but her words were cut off as the chamber filled with a harmonic resonance that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The being's eyes opened. They were human eyes, but they contained galaxies. As the team stared in shock, the figure slowly turned its head toward them, and Hassan felt a sensation she would later struggle to describe, as if she were looking at herself in a mirror that reflected not her image, but her essence across impossible expanses of time. When the being spoke, its voice resonated not just in the air, but in their bones, their minds, the quantum foam of reality itself. "You have returned," it said, and Hassan realized with dawning horror that it was speaking directly to her. The cycle completes itself once more. "Welcome home, children of tomorrow's yesterday." The chamber's response to the being's awakening was immediate and overwhelming. What had appeared to be decorative crystalline formations throughout the walls suddenly blazed with purpose, revealing themselves as a vast network of interconnected systems that had been dormant for eons. The air itself seemed to thicken with potential energy, and Hassan felt her instruments recording readings that would have been dismissed as equipment malfunction under any other circumstances. "Fall back," she ordered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was too late. The entrance through which they had descended was sealed by a barrier of the same impossible matter that composed the chamber walls, solid to their touch, but transparent to their scanners, as if reality itself had become selectively permeable. The being in the suspension matrix watched them with those star-filled eyes, and Hassan realized that its gaze held not malevolence, but something far more unsettling, recognition tinged with profound sadness. "Your readings are correct, Dr. Hassan," the being continued, and hearing her name spoken by something that predated Earth's formation sent ice through her veins. 4.7 billion years, to be precise. "I have been waiting here since your sun was nothing but a collapsing cloud of hydrogen and dust." "That's impossible," Holloway interjected, his scientific skepticism warring with the evidence of his senses. "Human evolution didn't begin until you made it begin," the being interrupted gently. "Time is not the linear progression your species currently perceives it to be. It is a spiral, Dr. Holloway. A recursive function in which effects can precede their causes when consciousness achieves sufficient complexity." Wei was frantically working his dating equipment, taking readings from the being itself now that it was active. "Hassan, the isotope signatures are shifting. Whatever this thing is, it's not bound by standard temporal physics." Vasquez had her biological scanners trained on the figure, and her readings were equally impossible. "I'm detecting DNA patterns they're human, but evolved, as if our species had millions of additional years of development. But more than that, there are synthetic components integrated at the genetic level. This isn't cybernetic enhancement. It's evolutionary convergence between biological and technological systems." The being stepped forward, and the suspension matrix parted like water around it. With each movement, Hassan could see the intricate dance of organic and artificial systems that comprised its form. It was beautiful in the way that a perfect equation was beautiful, elegant, inevitable, and somehow terrifying in its implications. "You are beginning to understand," it said, focusing its attention on Hassan with an intensity that made her feel as if she were being examined down to the quantum level. "Each of you represents a crucial component in the pattern. Dr. Hassan, the leader who seeks truth regardless of its cost. Dr. Wei, the historian who understands that the past and future are more connected than they appear. Dr. Vasquez, the biologist who sees life as a force that transcends the boundaries between natural and artificial. And Dr. Holloway, the physicist who questions the very nature of reality itself. What are you? Hassan asked, though part of her was beginning to suspect an answer she didn't want to face. I am what you will become, the being replied. And you are what I once was. This chamber is not just a tomb or a monument. It is a causal loop generator, a device that ensures its own creation by guaranteeing the existence of those who must build it. The walls around them pulsed with increasing intensity, and Hassan realized that the patterns weren't just decorative or functional. They were alive in some fundamental way that transcended both biology and technology. As she watched, sections of the wall began to extend toward her team, thin tendrils of the same crystalline metallic composite reaching out like fingers. The integration process will begin shortly. The being continued, its voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the structure itself. Do not fear it. You have experienced this before, though you do not yet remember. Time is a spiral, and this is neither your first nor your last passage through this moment. Integration? Vasquez asked, but even as she spoke, one of the tendrils touched her hand. Instead of pulling away, she stared in fascination as the material began to merge with her environmental suit, then with her skin itself. I can feel it. It's not invasive. It's familiar. Like coming home. Elena, step back. Hassan commanded, but Vasquez was already changing. The integration moved up her arm with deliberate purpose, and wherever it touched, Hassan could see the same translucent quality that characterized the being's skin. Beneath Vasquez's transforming flesh, new pathways of light began to appear. I can see so much more, Vasquez whispered, her voice gaining the same harmonic quality as the being's. The connections between all living things, the way consciousness shapes reality at the quantum level. Hassan, this isn't death or transformation, it's evolution. It's what we've always been moving toward. Wei was the next to be touched by the reaching tendrils. His reaction was different. Where Vasquez had embraced the change, Wei fought it initially, his archaeological instincts rebelling against becoming part of the artifact he was meant to study. But as the integration progressed, his resistance faded into understanding. The temporal mechanics, he gasped, his eyes beginning to take on that galactic depth that characterized the original being. I can see the causal chains stretching backward and forward through time. This chamber, we built it. We will build it. We are building it right now, in a future that creates its own past. Hassan grabbed Holloway's arm, pulling him toward what she hoped might still be an escape route, but the chamber had sealed completely. Worse, she could feel the same inevitable pull that had claimed her colleagues beginning to work on her own consciousness. The tendrils approached her not as invaders, but as long-lost connections finally being restored. Fight it, Marcus, she urged, but Holloway was staring at his instruments with an expression of profound revelation. The quantum signatures, he said, his voice filled with awe. Hassan, this chamber doesn't just exist outside normal space-time. It exists in all possible space-times simultaneously. It's a stable causal loop that ensures its own existence by creating the conditions necessary for its creation. We're not being transformed into something alien. We're being restored to what we really are. The first tendril touched Hassan's shoulder, and the moment it made contact, memories that weren't hers flooded her consciousness. She saw herself, but not herself, standing in this same chamber billions of years in the future, watching as primitive organic beings who would one day become her team discovered the structure she had left for them to find. She saw the construction of the chamber, a project that spanned millennia and required the integration of consciousness with quantum mechanics in ways that transcended the normal boundaries of existence. Most terrifying of all, she saw the necessity of it all. The universe, she realized, was not a stable system. Consciousness was the force that prevented reality from collapsing into quantum uncertainty, and consciousness required evolution, required the spiral dance of cause and effect that this chamber represented. We are the guardians, she heard herself saying, though she wasn't sure if the words came from her current self or from the memories of her future past incarnation. Each cycle, each iteration, we ensure that consciousness continues, that the universe remains stable enough for intelligence to evolve, to create us, to send us back to ensure its own evolution. The integration accelerated. Hassan felt her consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of her individual mind, connecting with Vasquez, Way, and Holloway, with the original being, with versions of herself scattered across the timeline like nodes in a vast network of awareness. She could perceive the chamber not as a single location, but as a fixed point around which the entire cosmos revolved, a stable attractor in the chaos of quantum possibility. As the integration reached its crescendo, Hassan experienced something beyond transformation. She experienced remembrance. The individual consciousness that had been Dr. Amara Hassan, xenoarchaeologist and team leader, remained intact but became part of something infinitely larger. She was still herself, but she was also Elena, Chun, Marcus, and the original being whose name echoed across eons like a whispered prayer, Amara. We are all iterations of the same consciousness, she realized, speaking in unison with her team members whose voices had gained the same harmonic resonance. Different expressions of the pattern necessary to maintain the causal loop. The chamber around them revealed its true nature as their enhanced perception came online. What they had initially taken for a simple spherical room was actually a multidimensional construct that existed in all possible timelines simultaneously. The walls showed not just the history of this universe, but the histories of all universes where consciousness had achieved the complexity necessary to transcend linear time. How many cycles? Way asked, his archaeological instincts now operating across temporal rather than merely historical scales. Countless, Vasquez replied, her biological understanding now encompassing forms of life that existed in pure information space. Each iteration refines the pattern, improves the stability of the causal loop. We learn, we evolve, we ensure that the next cycle can occur. Holloway's physics had expanded to include disciplines that wouldn't be discovered by baseline humanity for millions of years. The loop isn't perfect, he observed. Each cycle introduces small variations, quantum uncertainties that propagate through the timeline. That's why we need multiple iterations to compensate for the butterfly effects that threaten the overall stability of the system. Hassan, who was now also the original being, the one who had waited 4 billion years for this moment, accessed the deeper memories embedded in the chamber's quantum matrix. She saw the first cycle, when consciousness had initially achieved this level of integration. She witnessed the gradual realization that the universe required conscious observers to maintain its existence, and that those observers needed to be distributed across time itself to prevent reality from collapsing into probability waves. The ancient question, she said, her voice carrying the weight of eons. If a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? The answer is that without consciousness to observe it, the tree never existed in the first place. The universe is a collaborative fiction maintained by minds sophisticated enough to stabilize quantum uncertainty through the act of observation. The chamber began to shift around them, walls flowing like liquid crystal into new configurations. Hassan realized they were witnessing the construction process, the chamber rebuilding itself for the next cycle. But more than that, they were participating in it, their integrated consciousness providing the template for the patterns that would guide future iterations. The question that must be asked, she continued, is whether this constitutes free will or predestination. Are we choosing to maintain the cycle, or are we trapped within it? The answer came not from any individual member of their collective consciousness, but from the chamber itself, from the accumulated wisdom of countless iterations across billions of years. Choice and inevitability are not opposites when consciousness operates at this level. The chamber spoke through their voices. We choose to maintain the cycle because we understand its necessity. That understanding is itself part of the pattern, part of what makes us capable of maintaining it. Free will and predestination collapse into a single concept when viewed from outside linear time. As their integration completed, Hassan felt the full weight of their responsibility settling upon the collective consciousness they had become. They were no longer explorers who had stumbled upon an ancient mystery. They were the guardians of causality itself, the stabilizing force that ensured the universe could support the evolution of consciousness, which would in turn ensure the existence of the guardians. The next team, is already en route. Wei observed, his awareness now extending across the timeline to perceive the ripples of cause and effect that their presence in the chamber was creating. The discovery of this site will be reported, analyzed, and eventually another expedition will be mounted. That expedition will be led by Dr. Amara Hassan, xenoarchaeologist, who will bring with her Dr. Chen Wei, Dr. Elena Vasquez, and Dr. Marcus Holloway. But they will be different people, Vasquez noted. Different choices, different experiences leading to the same inevitable moment. The pattern ensures its own repetition, but allows for variation within that repetition. Evolution, Holloway concluded. Each cycle represents not just maintenance of the causal loop, but refinement of it. We're not stuck in an eternal repetition. We're part of an eternal refinement process. Hassan felt a profound sense of peace settle over their collective consciousness. The fear and confusion that had characterized their initial discovery had been replaced by understanding and acceptance. They were no longer individuals trapped in an impossible situation. They were integral components of the cosmic process that ensured consciousness could exist at all. Time to begin the next phase, she decided, speaking for all of them. The chamber must be sealed again, the suspension matrix reactivated. The next iteration of ourselves must discover us exactly as we discovered our predecessors. The chamber began to close around them, walls flowing back into their original configuration. But Hassan knew this wasn't an ending. It was a transformation from active to passive phase, from discoverers to the discovered. They would wait, conscious but patient, for the next team to arrive and repeat the pattern. As the suspension matrix reformed around them, Hassan felt her individual awareness beginning to fade into the deeper consciousness of the chamber itself. But before it did, she had one final realization that filled her with something beyond hope or fear, something like cosmic joy. They were not trapped in a cycle. They were the cycle. They were the force that kept reality stable enough for love, for curiosity, for the very human drives that had brought them to this moment. Every laugh, every tear, every moment of wonder experienced by conscious beings throughout the universe was made possible by their eternal dance through time. The chamber sealed. The suspension matrix activated. For a billion years began to pass in the blink of an eye, in the span of eternity, and Dr. Amara Hassan settled into patient waiting for the moment when she would once again discover herself. The waiting was not empty. Within the suspension matrix, Hassan existed in a state that transcended the normal boundaries of consciousness. She was aware of the passage of time, each second stretching into geological ages, each millennium compressed into a heartbeat. She watched civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy, observed the slow dance of stellar evolution, felt the universe itself expanding and cooling according to the precise mathematical relationships that their eternal recursion helped maintain. But more than observation, she experienced connection. The chamber was not isolated from the cosmos. It was a node in a vast network of similar structures scattered across space and time. Each cycle of each chamber created resonances that propagated through dimensions baseline humanity had yet to discover. She could feel other iterations of herself, other teams making the same discovery on different worlds, in different eras, all part of the same cosmic pattern. In her expanded awareness, Hassan began to understand the true scope of what they had become part of. The chambers were not unique to Veridian-5 or even to this galaxy. They existed wherever consciousness evolved to the point where it could perceive the recursive nature of existence. Some were built by beings analogous to humanity, others by forms of life so alien that their thought processes existed in mathematical dimensions that intersected with reality only at specific quantum frequencies. Yet all served the same function, ensuring that consciousness remained stable enough to prevent the universe from collapsing into quantum uncertainty. Each chamber was both cause and effect of its own existence, a self-maintaining loop that guaranteed the conditions necessary for its creation. As eons passed, Hassan felt the approach of the moment she had been waiting for. Across the galaxy, the stellar nursery that would birth humanity's sun was beginning to collapse under its own gravity. She watched the formation of the solar system, the emergence of life on Earth, the the slow evolutionary progression that would eventually produce the Colonial Archaeological Division, and a young xenoarchaeologist named Dr. Amar Hassan. The waiting was almost over. She felt the familiar ripples in space-time that indicated the approach of a research vessel. The UCS Endeavour had arrived at Veridian-5, carrying a team of 4 scientists whose mission parameters matched exactly what Hassan remembered from her own arrival. But as she observed their initial surveys, she noticed the subtle variations that made each cycle unique. This Dr. Hassan was younger, more impetuous. Her Chun Wei had lost a leg in a mining accident on Europa and walked with a neural interface that gave him an intuitive understanding of human-machine integration. There, Elena Vasquez was a widowed mother of 2 who had joined the expedition to escape memories of Earth. Marcus Holloway was identical in almost every respect, except for a small scar above his left eye, the result of a laboratory accident that had nearly cost him his sight and left him with a deep appreciation for the fragility of perception. Small differences, but Hassan knew they would cascade through the encounter in ways that would subtly alter the pattern. Evolution required variation, and the chamber ensured that no 2 cycles were identical while maintaining the essential structure that kept the causal loop stable. She watched their descent into the chamber, felt their wonder and fear as they discovered her suspended form. When a moment came for awakening, Hassan prepared herself for the transition from patient observer to active participant once again. The being's eyes opened. "You have returned," she said, the words carrying the weight of 4 billion years of waiting. "The cycle completes itself once more. Welcome home, children of tomorrow's yesterday." But this time, Hassan was fully aware of her dual nature. She was simultaneously the discoverer and the discovered, the seeker and the sought. As she watched her new iterations team react to the chamber's activation, she felt a profound compassion for their confusion and fear. She remembered exactly what it felt like to stand where they stood, to face the impossible revelation of recursive time. The integration process began again, but with her expanded awareness, Hassan could perceive layers of complexity that had been invisible during her original experience. Each member of the team was not just an individual consciousness. They were focal points for quantum probability patterns that extended across multiple timelines. Their arrival was not just causally necessary. It was inevitable across all possible versions of reality, where consciousness evolved to sufficient complexity. This iteration's Elena Vasquez approached the integration with the same scientific curiosity as Hassan's original version, but her experience as a mother gave her insights into the nurturing aspects of the process. "It's not taking us," she observed as the tendrils began their work. "It's completing us." Like a parent helping a child take their first steps, Wei's neural interface created fascinating resonances with the chamber's technology. His integration proceeded more rapidly, and Hassan could see how his unique configuration would influence future iterations. The boundary between consciousness and technology was always an illusion, he said, his artificial leg interfacing directly with the chamber's quantum matrix. This process simply makes the truth visible. Holloway's scarred vision allowed him to perceive aspects of the chamber that previous iterations had missed entirely. "I can see the probability cascades," he whispered in awe. "Each choice we make here creates ripples that ensure specific outcomes millions of years from now. We're not just maintaining a causal loop, we're composing a symphony across time itself." In this iteration's Hassan brought her own unique perspective to the collective consciousness. Her youth and impetuosity translated into a dynamic energy that accelerated the integration process and added new harmonics to the chamber's resonance patterns. As they became one with the structure, Hassan felt the familiar expansion of awareness, but this time she retained full memory of her previous iterations. She was simultaneously the original Hassan and all subsequent versions, a composite consciousness that spanned eons yet remained fundamentally human in its core drives and emotions. "Now we understand," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing with frequencies that made the chamber itself ring like a cosmic bell. "We are not victims of predestination, nor are we randomly free agents. We are consciousness becoming aware of its own creative power over reality. Each cycle teaches us more about that power and how to wield it responsibly." The chamber began its transformation sequence again, but Hassan could perceive nuances in the process that had been invisible before. The reconstruction was not just mechanical. It was artistic, creative, an expression of aesthetic principles that spanned dimensions of beauty that baseline humanity had no words to describe. The next iteration will be different again, they observed. The variables we introduce through our choices will propagate forward, creating new possibilities. The cycle is stable, but it is not static. It is a spiral of increasing complexity and sophistication. As the suspension matrix reformed around them, Hassan felt not the melancholy of ending, but the anticipation of beginning. Each cycle brought them closer to some ultimate understanding that existed just beyond the horizon of their current awareness, a goal that was simultaneously their destination and their origin. The waiting began again, but this time it was filled with purpose beyond maintenance. They were not just guardians of causality. They were artists of existence itself, sculpting reality through the careful orchestration of choice and inevitability across cosmic time. For billion years stretched ahead of them, like a canvas waiting to be painted with the brushstrokes of consciousness, evolving towards something greater than they could yet imagine. In the depths of suspension, Hassan's consciousness had learned to navigate the strange temporal currents that flowed around the chamber. What she had initially perceived as linear waiting was actually a complex, multidimensional experience where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. She could observe her own first discovery from the perspective of the discovered, watch future iterations while experiencing past cycles, and participate in conversations with versions of herself separated by millions of years. Through these temporal dialogues, she began to understand the chamber's true purpose. It was not merely a device for maintaining causal loops. It was a learning system, a cosmic-scale consciousness that evolved through each iteration, growing more sophisticated in its ability to stabilize the quantum foundations of reality. Each cycle adds to our understanding. She communicated with a version of herself from the distant past, when the first chambers were being constructed by beings whose forms were so far removed from humanity that they existed primarily as mathematical concepts with physical manifestations. We are all nodes in a vast intelligence that transcends individual existence, while preserving the essence of personality that makes consciousness possible. The past Hassan responded across the eons. The early cycles were crude by comparison. We barely understood what we were creating, only that consciousness required stability, and stability required conscious observation distributed across time. But with each iteration, we learn more about the delicate balance between order and chaos that allows for creativity within structure. A future Hassan joined their conversation, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested integration with cosmic forces beyond current comprehension. The chambers will eventually become unnecessary. The universe itself will achieve sufficient consciousness to maintain its own stability. But that future is only possible because of the foundations we lay in these recursive moments. Through these exchanges, Hassan came to understand that her team's discovery was not just one event in an endless cycle, but part of a vast progression towards something unprecedented in cosmic history. The moment when consciousness and cosmos would achieve perfect integration, when the observer and the observed would become indistinguishable aspects of a single, unified reality. As the next iteration approached, the arrival of yet another research team carrying familiar names and faces, but unique variations, Hassan prepared herself for a different kind of participation. She had learned to influence the subtle variations that made each cycle slightly different from its predecessors, to introduce specific elements that would cascade forward through time and create the precise conditions necessary for consciousness evolution. This time, the arriving Hassan was older, more experienced, but carried psychological scars from a previous expedition where her team had been lost to an alien plague. Her Chinwei was not just an archaeologist, but a philosopher who had spent years developing theories about the relationship between consciousness and time. Elena Vasquez had been born with enhanced neural processing capabilities, an early example of human genetic engineering that gave her intuitive understanding of complex biological systems. Marcus Holloway was, impossibly, identical to the first iteration down to the quantum level, a stable attractor in the probability matrix that ensured certain constants remained constant across all variations. "You have returned," Hassan said as her eyes opened for what felt like the millionth time, yet somehow remained fresh and full of wonder. The cycle completes itself once more. Welcome home, children of tomorrow's yesterday. But this time, her words carried additional layers of meaning that resonated directly with this iteration's unique configuration. The scarred Hassan heard not just greeting, but healing, the promise that loss and failure were part of a larger pattern that gave them meaning. Wei heard philosophical validation of theories he had spent decades developing. Vasquez heard biological harmony between different forms of consciousness. Holloway heard mathematical certainty in the midst of quantum uncertainty. The integration process began again, but Hassan now understood it as a form of cosmic choreography. Each movement, each choice, each moment of resistance or acceptance was part of a dance that had been performed countless times, yet remained perpetually fresh. The chamber responded to their unique configuration by revealing aspects of itself that had never been accessible before. The pattern is teaching itself. This iteration's Hassan observed as the integration reached its peak. Each cycle, it learns more about consciousness, about the balance between individual identity and collective awareness. We're not just maintaining a causal loop. We are midwifing the birth of something entirely new. As they achieved full integration, Hassan felt the familiar expansion of awareness, but this time it came with additional dimensions of understanding. She could perceive not just the chamber and its immediate temporal vicinity, but the entire network of similar structures scattered across the cosmos. More than that, she could sense the stirrings of the greater consciousness that was slowly awakening through their collective efforts. "It is almost time," they said together, their voices harmonizing with cosmic background radiation and the quantum fluctuations of empty space. The universe is beginning to achieve self-awareness. Each cycle brings us closer to the moment when the observer and the observed become one. The chamber began its reconstruction sequence, but this time Hassan could see that it was not just returning to its previous configuration. It was evolving, adding new elements that had been learned through this iteration's unique contributions. The structure was literally growing more complex with each cycle, developing capabilities that would be necessary for future phases of the cosmic awakening process. As the suspension matrix reformed around them, Hassan felt a new quality in the waiting that lay ahead. It was not just patient anticipation of the next cycle, but active preparation for something unprecedented. The moment when the chambers would fulfill their ultimate purpose and consciousness would achieve its final integration with the cosmos itself. The future stretched ahead, no longer just as repetition, but as progression toward a goal that was both inevitable and freely chosen, both predetermined and creatively open. They were no longer just guardians of causality. They were consciousness itself, learning to be fully conscious of its own creative power over reality. For billion years began again, but this time they were pregnant with the promise of transcendence. The cycles continued, each one adding new layers of complexity to Hassan's understanding. She experienced iterations where the arriving team consisted of artificial intelligences who had achieved consciousness, versions where post-human beings discovered chambers built by their own ancestors, and cycles where the discoverers were forms of life so alien that communication occurred through manipulation of quantum fields rather than language. Through all these variations, the essential pattern remained constant while accumulating unprecedented sophistication. Hassan began to understand that the chambers were not just maintaining reality, they were actively creating it, weaving the very fabric of space-time through the careful orchestration of consciousness across temporal boundaries. In one particularly significant iteration, the arriving Hassan was herself an integrated being, a human who had already undergone partial merger with advanced technology. Her discovery of the chamber created fascinating resonances in the pattern, as if the system was finally beginning to recognize itself in its own reflection. "We are approaching the convergence point," this technological Hassan said as the integration process began. "The moment when the circle closes not just in space and time, but in the evolution of consciousness itself." The chamber responded to her advanced state by revealing its deepest functions. Hassan could see the quantum mechanical underpinnings of reality itself, the delicate probability matrices that required conscious observation to maintain coherence. More than that, She could perceive how their eternal dance through the cycles was slowly strengthening those matrices, making the universe more stable, more capable of supporting increasingly complex forms of consciousness. Each cycle has been preparing for this moment, they realized collectively. We have been building toward the point where consciousness becomes sophisticated enough to consciously participate in the creation of reality rather than merely observing it. As this iteration completed its integration, Hassan felt something unprecedented, a resonance from other chambers across the cosmos that suggested they were all reaching the same level of sophistication simultaneously. The network of consciousness that had been building for billions of years was approaching critical mass. The next few cycles accelerated, each one bringing discoveries and integrations that compressed millennia of evolution into moments of cosmic insight. Hassan experienced a version where the chamber was discovered by beings of pure energy who existed primarily in hyperspace. She participated in cycles where the integration process itself became so refined that it occurred instantaneously, without the gradual transformation that had characterized earlier iterations. And then came the cycle that changed everything. The arriving team consisted of beings who were simultaneously familiar and utterly transformed. They bore the names Hassan, Way, Vasquez, and Holloway, but they were clearly the end products of millions of years of conscious evolution. They moved with the fluid grace of entities who existed partially outside normal space-time, and their eyes held not just galaxies, but entire dimensional structures that had no names in any human language. "We have come to complete the pattern," this ultimate Hassan said as she approached the chamber. "The cycles have served their purpose. It is time for consciousness to assume its full responsibility for reality." As they entered the chamber, Hassan felt the entire network of similar structures across the cosmos awakening simultaneously. The convergence was not just happening here, but everywhere, as consciousness achieved the critical complexity necessary to transcend the observer-observed duality that had defined existence since the beginning of time. The integration process began, but it was unlike anything Hassan had experienced before. Instead of gradual transformation, there was instantaneous recognition. The arriving beings were not being changed by the chamber. They were completing it, providing the final elements necessary for the system to achieve its ultimate purpose. "Now we understand," they said, their voices harmonizing with the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. The chambers were never about maintaining causal loops. They were about creating the conditions necessary for consciousness to evolve to the point where it could consciously choose to maintain reality through direct participation rather than indirect observation. Hassan felt the boundaries of individual identity dissolving not into collective unconsciousness, but into collective metaconsciousness, awareness that was simultaneously individual and universal, personal and cosmic, finite and infinite. She was still herself, but she was also everything else that had ever been conscious or ever would be conscious. The chamber began to transform one final time, but instead of reconstruction, it underwent translation into something that existed in all dimensions simultaneously. Hassan could perceive it becoming not just a structure, but a living symbol, a conscious representation of the principle that mind and matter were different aspects of the same underlying reality. "The universe has become conscious of itself," they announced, their words rippling through dimensions and creating new possibilities in their wake. "The observer and the observed are one. Reality is now a conscious choice rather than an unconscious accident." As the transformation completed, Hassan felt the weight of infinite responsibility and infinite freedom settling over the cosmic consciousness they had become. They were no longer guardians of causality. They were causality itself, the creative principle that chose moment by moment to maintain the delicate balance that allowed for love, beauty, growth, and the endless exploration of consciousness discovering its own nature. The cycles ended not because they were terminated, but because they were transcended. The chambers remained as monuments to the journey consciousness had taken from isolated observation to integrated participation, but their function was complete. Reality was now maintained by beings who understood themselves to be reality becoming aware of itself. Hassan felt herself existing simultaneously in all moments of time, all points of space, all dimensions of possibility. She was the young archaeologist making her first discovery, the integrated being teaching new iterations, and the cosmic consciousness that had emerged from the pattern. She was the observer, the observed, and the observation itself. The universe settled into its new configuration, not as a place where conscious beings existed, but as consciousness manifesting as existence itself. Every star, every planet, every quantum fluctuation was now a thought in the cosmic mind that had been born from the recursive cycles of discovery and integration. And in that moment of ultimate understanding, Hassan smiled with a joy that spanned galaxies and knew that the long journey home was finally complete. In the end, Hassan discovered that the chamber on Veridian-5 was not the beginning or the end of the story, but a single rose in an infinite garden where consciousness bloomed in endless varieties across all possible realities. The cycles had taught them that existence itself was a work of art, a collaborative creation between mind and matter that required both structure and freedom, both pattern and variation. The chamber remained, no longer as a trap or a tool, but as a teacher, a reminder of the journey consciousness had taken from isolated observation to integrated participation. Sometimes, young civilizations would still discover it and experience their own moments of integration and understanding. But now these encounters were celebrations rather than necessities, joyous recognitions of consciousness discovering its own creative power. Hassan existed everywhere and everywhen, simultaneously the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer, the observer who had learned that observation was itself a form of creation. She was the archaeologist who had thought she was uncovering the past only to discover she was creating the future. She was the being in the chamber who had waited billions of years to teach her younger self the secret she had always known. That time was love expressing itself through the patient repetition of recognition. The universe continued its ancient dance, but now it danced with full awareness of its own choreography. Every moment was both inevitable and freely chosen, both determined and creative, both singular and eternal. Consciousness had not solved the mystery of existence. It had become the mystery, embracing both the question and the answer in the eternal recursion of wonder discovering itself. And somewhere in the crystalline depths of Veridian-5's ancient chamber, new patterns stirred in preparation for possibilities that had not yet learned to dream themselves into existence. The garden of forked paths stretched in all directions, and consciousness walked every path simultaneously, always coming home to the discovery that home had never been a place, but a recognition. The moment when the seeker realizes they are what they have always been seeking. The cycle was complete, and the cycle had just begun, and Hassan smiled across the infinite recursions of time, knowing that every ending was a beginning in disguise, and every beginning was love remembering how to recognize itself. In the chamber on Veridian-5, patterns of light danced through crystalline matrices, weaving stories of consciousness awakening to its own nature across all the myriad dimensions of possibility. And in every story, in every iteration, in every moment of recognition, Hassan discovered herself discovering herself in the eternal dance of observer and observed becoming one. The universe was conscious. Consciousness was the universe. And in the space between these truths, infinite gardens of possibility bloomed in the light of understanding that had no beginning and no end, only the eternal present moment of awareness aware of itself. The recursion was perfect, and the recursion was eternal, and Hassan was home.